the AMIGO Act, at minimum, identical to our Geographic Overland Neighbor Act. The part where I propose we vote at least as carefully as the country right across our southern border and watch everyone squirm. Let me tell you something about Mexico. Not a political speech, not a lecture. I just need you to sit with one specific fact for a moment before I tell you what I am actually proposing here. Because the fact matters a lot. Mexico gives every voter something called a credential para votar. It is free. You show up in person, bring your birth certificate and a photo ID. And then they photograph you, take all 10 of your fingerprints. And as of the biometric CURP rollout currently happening across Mexico right now in 2026, scan your iris, your actual eyeball, scanned before you vote. The card has holograms, QR codes with your biometric data baked directly into them, UV reactive inks, microprinting so precise that every serious attempt at counterfeiting it has been a public embarrassment for the people who tried. Machine-readable zones, valid for 10 years. Checked at the polling station. No card, you don't vote, period. Not a suggestion, not a guideline, a requirement. Now hold that picture crystal clear in your mind while I describe what happens every single time someone in America dares to suggest we might want to verify that voters are actually citizens before we hand them a ballot. Voter suppression, racist, attack on democracy. I spent 23 years in the Army. I worked as a paramedic. I teach science for a living. I have seen a lot of things that did not add up logically in all of those roles. But nothing prepared me for the intellectual gymnastics required to call Mexico's voter verification standard racist when applied to America. Nothing. The AMIGO Act, what I am actually proposing. Here's my bill. The AMIGO Act, at minimum, identical to our Geographic Overland Neighbor Act, proposes we match Mexico. Not beat Mexico, not leapfrog Mexico, match Mexico. Free biometric voter credential for every American citizen. You show up in person, you prove citizenship, they photograph you, they take your fingerprints, they scan your iris if we can manage it, because apparently Mexico can manage it. And the last time I checked, we still have electricity most of the time. You get a card that is yours, that is verified, that is yours, and you present it when you vote. Forgery resistant, biometrically tied to you specifically. Free for every citizen who needs one. That is the AMIGO Act. Now, about the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act HR 22, HR 7296, is the legislation currently being debated that asks for something considerably more modest than what I just described. It requires documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote. It accepts a real ID, a passport, a military ID with service records, a tribal document, or a birth certificate with any photo ID alongside it. Section 2.4 has a specific process for name discrepancies. So your grandmother who got married in 1957 is not turned away because her license says a different last name. That is it. No fingerprints, no iris scan, no biometrics, nothing Mexico does not already lap us on before breakfast. The SAVE Act is the floor. The AMIGO Act is where we should actually be. The fact that we are fighting about the floor, the absolute bare minimum, is the part that should bother you. And I am going to tell you exactly why we are fighting about it. 19,000. That is how many counterfeit driver's licenses were seized from a single shipment out of China. One shipment. Chicago. The barcodes worked. They tested them in Michigan. Scanned clean. Every scanner they ran them through accepted them without a flag. A fake ID with a working barcode is not functionally a fake ID for most purposes. It is a fabricated identity on a card that the technology in front of you has no way to distinguish from a real one. And you can currently use a state driver's license to register to vote. Louisville, 2019, separate seizure, separate city, 3,000 fake licenses, and 3,100 blank card stocks, ready to print, whatever name you need, whatever address, whatever you want. Now I want you to ask yourself, and take your time with this, why the party that screams the loudest about election security concerns being conspiracy theories is the exact same party fighting the hardest against cleaning the voter rolls, auditing the ballots, and verifying citizenship at registration. Georgia had 364,000 ineligible voter registrations on the rolls during 2020. Wisconsin had 7.1 million registered voters in a state with roughly 3.6 to 3.7 million adults who actually vote. A Berkeley statistics professor, Berkeley, not exactly a stronghold of right-wing conspiracy thinking, found what he described as real reasons to distrust the election outcome. FBI agents walked into Fulton County in January 2026 with TWO federal court-approved search warrants and seized 600 plus boxes of election records. Federal judges do not sign search warrants because someone was mean on the internet. The Time magazine shadow campaign article, written by their own people, published in their own magazine, bragged about the coordinated effort to change election rules, control information, and influence the outcome. Not alleged, their words, their admission. An innocent system does not fight this hard against examination. Communist goal number 15 entered into the congressional record on the 10th of January, 1963. Capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. I am not saying it happened. I am saying the playbook exists, it is in the record, and the evidence does not explain itself. Now here is the part where everybody gets uncomfortable. I want to make this point as clearly as I know how to make anything. The left argues loudly, repeatedly, with great theatrical passion that requiring photo identification to exercise a constitutional right is racist, unconstitutional, an unconscionable burden on communities that cannot be expected to navigate a system that requires documentation. That is the argument. I want to make sure we all agree that is the argument, because here is where it goes. The Second Amendment is a constitutional right. The First Amendment is a constitutional right. The right to vote, whether you trace it through the 15th, 19th, 24th, or 26th Amendment, is a constitutional right. If requiring ID to exercise a constitutional right is unconstitutional, then every federal firearm background check is unconstitutional. Every single one. The Form 4,473 you fill out at a gun dealer. The photo ID you present. The background check that runs your name. Every bit of it. If the logic the left applies to voter ID is applied consistently to the Second Amendment, is an unconstitutional burden on the exercise of a constitutional right. I did not make this logic up. They did. I am just following it to the end of the road. I call the companion bill the Constitutional Firearms Access Act. If ID cannot be required to vote, ID cannot be required to buy a firearm. Same constitution, same logic, same standard. If you oppose one and support the other, you do not have a principle, you have a preference. And the preference is transparent. Now, I suspect some Republicans are quietly uncomfortable right now too. Because if we go full AMIGO Act, full Mexico biometric standard, that means a national voter credential database, federal infrastructure, enrollment systems. And some of my colleagues on the right have concerns about federal ID systems in general, and I understand that instinct. But here's the thing. The alternative is 19,000 fake IDs with working barcodes moving through Chicago in a single shipment. The alternative is 364,000 ineligible registrations on Georgia's rolls. The alternative is ballot counts that do not match voter files by hundreds of thousands of entries. If we do not build a system that works, we are left defending a system that manifestly does not. So yes, both sides are on notice. Democrats, because the voter ID logic they use to fight this would eliminate every gun background check in America if applied consistently. Republicans. Because if you actually care about election integrity the way you claim to, the SAVE Act is the floor, not the ceiling. And AMIGO is where we need to go. The racist argument. One final time. If requiring photo ID to vote is racist in America, Mexico, roughly 60%, mestizo and indigenous, has operated one of the most aggressively racist elections in the Western Hemisphere for 30 years. I will just let that breathe. The specific claim that Black and Hispanic Americans face unique barriers to obtaining a free government document is, in my professional opinion as an educator, one of the most condescending arguments ever dressed up as advocacy. It says those communities cannot manage what Mexican citizens manage, what Indian citizens manage, what French, Brazilian, German, and Canadian citizens manage, without a constitutional crisis. Without emergency legislation, without a task force. That is not protection, that is pity in a press release. Sen, John Ossoff, required photo ID for his own town halls, while voting against federal voter ID laws. The Democratic National Committee checked credentials at their own convention. Their congressional offices require ID at the door. These are facts, documented, on the record. Quinn's Law number 2. If you want to know what liberals are up to, pay attention to what they accuse conservatives of doing. The party calling voter ID suppression cards you before you enter their building. So here is where we are. The SAVE Act is barely an inconvenience. A birth certificate and a photo ID. That is the ask. Mexico does not even recognize that as a real security measure anymore. They moved past it 30 years ago. The AMIGO Act is where America should actually be. Free, biometric, yours, verified. And built to make 19,000 fake Chinese IDs with working barcodes irrelevant. Because a barcode cannot replicate your iris. And the Constitutional Firearms Access Act is waiting in the wings. Because if ID cannot be required to exercise one constitutional right, the left needs to explain at length and in writing why it can be required for another. I am not holding my breath on that explanation. What is next? A major American political party tells us that the same voter ID standard used by a majority indigenous nation is white supremacy in the United States. Wait, they already said that. But what do I know? I am only a science teacher and Army combat medic who read the actual bill, studied Mexico's actual credentialing system, followed the left's ID logic all the way to the Second Amendment, where it promptly fell apart, noticed 19,000 fake barcodes moving through Chicago, and figured out that the party fighting hardest against election transparency is the same party that cards you at the door of their own fundraisers.